My name is Vivian Castellan. I'm 41 years old, and for 21 years I kept the books for my family. Every bill, every account, every dollar my husband ever spent. Last spring, at 9:52 on a Wednesday night, while I was reconciling a client's payroll at my kitchen table, my phone lit up with a message from Tulum. It was from Roger, my husband. "I left with your sister. We're not coming back." I read it twice. Then I typed my reply and set the phone face down. Good luck. That was all he got. My sister didn't text at all. By midnight, every card was dead. Every password was changed. And a locksmith was booked for 7 in the morning. I did what I do best. I made a list and worked it. But here's what none of them knew. I'm the one who kept this family's books for 2 decades, and paper always talks to me eventually. Because the next morning, while the locksmith was still drilling out the second deadbolt, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway, and the question the detective asked me at my own kitchen table was one even I never saw coming. Welcome back to Untold Secret Hub, where quiet women tell the stories nobody saw coming, and dignity always gets the last word. If you believe a calm head beats a loud mouth, drop a comment below and subscribe. Numbers don't lie. People do. It took me 21 years to learn the second part. I married Roger Castellan when I was 18 and he was 22. He was the funniest man in Millbridge, Pennsylvania, a contractor with sawdust on his boots and a wave for everybody on Chestnut Street. I was the quiet one. I worked as a bank teller, took night classes, and passed the CPA exam at 26. At 32, I opened my own office, Castellan Accounting, 1 block from the hardware store. Half this county brings me shoeboxes full of receipts every April, and I have never once judged what falls out of them. For a long time, we were good. Then, 4 years ago, Castellan Builders went under. Roger bid 2 jobs he couldn't finish and the debt came home with him. I sat him down, built an 18-month payoff plan, and we cleared every cent of it. I thought that was love. He apparently thought it was humiliation. That was when the little joke started. He'd introduce me at cookouts as the family calculator. He'd hold up a receipt at the grocery store and ask, loud enough for the cashier, whether this purchase was approved by the budget office. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, mostly. Our marriage had gone quiet by then, the way a house goes quiet in winter, and I made the mistake of believing quiet meant safe. I balanced the accounts, cooked on Sundays, and told myself steady was its own kind of happy. Looking back, the ledger was right in front of me the whole time. I just hadn't been given all the pages yet, and the man across the dinner table was the one holding them back. People ask me how I felt that night. The honest answer is that I felt organized. Crying was on the list. I scheduled it for later. After the banks closed at 10:15, I locked down our online banking, changed every password, and rewrote every security question. My mother's maiden name was retired on the spot. I canceled both credit cards. I was the primary holder on each, so that took 1 call apiece, and a very sympathetic young man named Marcus. The joint checking account was trickier. You cannot close a joint account alone. The bank needs both signatures, which is a sentence I'd explained to clients 100 times and never expected to hate. So I did what the law allowed. I moved my paycheck deposit out, transferred my own funds to my personal account, and asked the fraud line to flag the account for unusual activity. Then I emailed Meredith Doyle, the sharpest attorney in 3 counties and my friend for 18 years. Need to meet, it's urgent, bring coffee. At 11:40, I opened the fire safe in the den to pull our documents, and that was the first time my hands went still. Roger's passport was gone. Not misplaced, gone. Along with the folder sleeve it lived in. And the cabin file, the fat manila folder that held everything about my grandmother's place on Sinclair Lake, felt thin. I stood there in my bathrobe, holding a folder that weighed less than it should, and a small cold voice in my head, the one I use for audits, said the thing I didn't want to hear. This didn't start tonight. Whatever this was, it had been running for a while, and it had been running through my paperwork. To explain my sister, I have to explain the cabin. Delphine is 35, 6 years younger than me, and she has never once finished paying anyone back. Cosmetology school, a boutique that lasted 8 months, an online jewelry business. I have a file at home labeled family, and it says she's borrowed about $11,000 from me over the years. I stopped expecting it back around the 3rd loan. Our grandmother, Esther Voss, saw it earlier than I did. Grandma Esther was a schoolteacher's widow who cleaned offices downtown at dawn to keep her cabin on Sinclair Lake. For 9 years, I did her books for free, drove her to every appointment, and sat with her every Sunday while she checked my math for sport. 6 years ago, Delphine asked her for $18,000 to open a boutique. Grandma said no, kindly, and told her why. Money follows habits, and Delphine's habits worried her. A year later, Grandma passed at 88. She left Delphine $9,000 in cash, which was gone in 4 months. She left me the cabin and her small brokerage account, with a note that said, "Check the math twice, then sign your name like you mean it." At the first anniversary dinner for Grandma, Delphine had some wine and said the line she'd clearly been saving all year. "You were always the calculator, Vivian. Never the heart." I let it go. Sisters say things. But this past year, Delphine had turned strangely sweet on me, dropping by the office, complimenting my hair, asking about Roger's schedule like it was small talk. Sitting at my kitchen table that Wednesday night, I finally understood what that sweetness had been. It was overhead. She was covering expenses. At 11 that night, my mother called. Word travels fast when your sister posts a beach photo from a resort she can't afford. Mom was crying before I said hello. "Vivian, honey, don't do anything rash. Please think of the family." I sat down slowly because something in her voice was off. And I've spent my whole career listening for the number that doesn't belong in the column. She never asked when it started. She never asked how I found out. She never even asked if I was sure. A mother who just learned her son-in-law ran off with her younger daughter asks 100 questions, and mine asked none of them. Instead she said, "Whatever happens, let's keep this in the family. People at church don't need to know our business." I told her I loved her, and that I had calls to make, which was true. And I hung up, which was necessary. Then I sat in my kitchen and did what I do with a suspicious invoice. I didn't accuse. I just circled it and set it aside. My mother, Rosalind Voss, is 67, widowed 9 years, and she has never once in her life been the first to know anything. That night, she wasn't surprised. I wrote one line on my legal pad, right under the locksmith's number. "Mom, since when?" Then I turned off the kitchen light and saw the 2 coffee mugs upside down on the rack by the sink. His and mine, the way I'd set them out every night for 21 years. Starting tomorrow, this house only needed one. I left them both there anyway. Even an accountant closes some accounts slowly. At 8:20 the next morning, the locksmith was drilling out the second deadbolt when a Millbridge police cruiser rolled up my driveway, followed by an unmarked sedan. I remember thinking, absurdly, that Roger couldn't possibly have reported his own house keys stolen from Mexico. A woman in a charcoal blazer came up the walk, mid-50s, coffee in one hand, badge in the other. "Mrs. Castellan, Detective Renata Cho. Do you have a few minutes? It's about a wire transfer." I poured her a cup, and we sat at the same kitchen table where my marriage had ended by text 9 hours earlier. She slid a photocopy across the wood. It was a wire order from Anchorstone Bank, dated the day before, moving $38,000 out of the Esther Voss Trust account, my grandmother's account, my separate inheritance, to a receiving bank in Quintana Roo, Mexico. The bank's fraud department had held it. A dormant trust account, a sudden 5-figure wire, a foreign destination. The computer flagged it, and a human being agreed. The order was signed in person at the branch, Cho said, watching my face. "Yesterday, at 3:20 in the afternoon." Then she turned the page around and pointed to the signature line, and the kitchen went very still, because there was my own name in handwriting that looked close enough to mine to fool anyone who didn't sign 300 documents a year. "Mrs. Castellan," she said, not unkindly, "can you confirm this is your signature?" The locksmith's drill whined in the hallway. My cards were cancelled. My locks were being changed. My husband was on a beach with my sister. And now a detective was sitting in my kitchen, asking me to explain a signature I had never signed, on money he was still trying to steal. Here's the thing about being an accountant. Your whole life is time-stamped. I didn't argue with Detective Cho. I opened my laptop and showed her my calendar. Yesterday at 3:15, I was in my office with Adele Frost, a client of 13 years, walking her through a quarterly filing. The appointment was confirmed by email, initialed on my intake sheet, and as it happens, covered by the camera the jeweler next door points at our shared parking lot. Then I pulled 5 documents from my files, tax returns, my office lease, my driver's license renewal, and laid the signatures next to the wire order. Look at the V, I said. Mine breaks to the left. It has since I was 10 years old. This one loops right. Cho set them side by side and looked for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and thoughtful, and asked the question that rearranged my entire understanding of my own life. Mrs. Castellan, has your husband ever signed for you before? I opened my mouth to say no, and a memory arrived instead. Roger at the door in his fishing vest, years of Saturday mornings saying he'd drop the paperwork at the bank so I wouldn't have to make the trip. Me, grateful, him whistling on the way to the truck. Detective, I said carefully, I think you should tell me the status of that $38,000. She almost smiled. It's held. Frozen. Pending investigation. Nothing's left the country. Then she gathered the photocopies and said something I have kept like a receipt ever since. Madam, in my experience, the person who cancels the cards first usually isn't the one hiding. She left her card on my table. I left it face up. After the cruiser pulled away, I stood in front of our filing cabinet the way a surgeon stands in front of an X-ray. The cabin account statement should have run in an unbroken monthly line, the way I keep everything. Instead there were gaps. 3 years of gaps, whole seasons missing, and I don't lose paper. There was no home equity folder at all, which meant nothing to me yet, except that a memory kept knocking. 16 months ago, a courtesy notice from Anchorstone Bank had shown up in our mailbox referencing an account number I didn't recognize. I hadn't shrugged it off. I'd called the branch the same day and asked for someone in lending. And Terrence Cobb, Roger's fishing buddy, 14 years of Saturday mornings on the lake, got on the line warm as pancakes. System error, he said. A mailing glitch. Notices went out to half of Millbridge. Nothing attached to our name. I asked for that in writing, because I asked for everything in writing. A week later, a letter arrived on bank stationery confirming it, signed by Terrence himself. I filed it. I trusted the paper. Because the paper came from inside the bank. That letter was still in my cabinet. And I set it on the kitchen table like the first card in a hand I was finally being dealt face up. Then I spread every statement I did have across the table. Tax, season style, and poured the coffee I make when a client is being audited. Roger didn't just run away with my sister. He ran away with a paper trail. He forgot one thing. Paper is my native language. And I was about to read every word he left behind. I took 2 personal days, which people at my office found alarming, since I hadn't taken one since 2020. 48 hours, 3 pots of coffee, 1 legal pad. I called the brokerage that held Grandma Esther's account and requested duplicate statements 5 years back. I called Anchorstone Bank and did the same for anything tied to our address. Then the first quiet horror surfaced. 3 years ago. The mailing address on the Esther Voss Trust's brokerage account, and on an Anchorstone account I didn't yet recognize, had been changed from my house on Larkin Avenue to Post Office Box 118 Millbridge. I have never rented a post office box in my life. Every statement, every notice, every annual summary for 3 years had been sailing right past me into a locked brass door at the post office, 5 blocks from my own office. That was why my files had gaps. That was why the courtesy notice 16 months ago was the only crumb that ever reached my mailbox. One clerical slip in an otherwise airtight detour. I sat with that for a minute, because the address change form would have required a signature, and I was starting to understand whose hand had been busy being mine. The second find was smaller and worse. Going through Roger's desk drawer for the truck title, I found a folded pamphlet for Anchorstone's mobile app, with a login name penciled in the corner in his blocky handwriting. We didn't bank at Anchorstone. We never had, not for checking, not for savings, not for anything I'd ever opened. The next morning, the first duplicate statement came through by email, and I printed it and watched the header come off the printer line by line. Home equity line of credit. Property 6 Sinclair Lake Road, a home equity line of credit opened 3 years ago, secured against my grandmother's cabin. Credit limit $95,000. Drawn $86,000. I read the statement standing up, then read it again sitting down. The cabin was mine alone, inherited property. Separate property. The one thing in my life Roger's name had never touched. To hang a loan on it, someone had to sign as Vivian Castellan. And someone had. I requested the full loan file, and when it came there I was, page after page. Vivian Castellan on the application. Vivian Castellan on the disclosures. Vivian Castellan on the closing documents. Every signature looping right, while the real one, mine, has broken left since I was 10. At the bottom of the closing package, on the line marked loan officer, was a name I'd been saying at cookouts for 14 years. Terrence Cobb. Terrence, who fished with Roger every Saturday the weather allowed. Terrence, who wrote me a letter on bank stationery calling the one warning I ever got a system error. Terrence, who sold me a certificate of deposit at my own kitchen table the year my grandmother died and complimented my apple crisp. I laid the pages out in a grid, the way I do when a client's books don't balance, and let the shape of it come forward. $86,000. My grandmother cleaned offices at dawn for that cabin. He signed my name to it somewhere between the 8th hole and lunch. I wrote Terrence's name on my legal pad and drew a box around it, which in my office is not a doodle. It's a category. The question was no longer what Roger had taken. It was how many people had helped him take it. I called the branch the next morning and asked for Terrence Cobb. Terrence, I was told, had gone on sudden personal leave. Interesting timing, I said, and asked for whoever handled home equity files. I got a service manager with a voice like laminated cardboard. Ma'am, your signature is on file. The file is fully notarized. I'm not sure what you'd like me to do. I would like the name of the notary, I said. She'd have to research that and follow up. I asked when. She couldn't say. I asked for her name and spelled it back to her, along with the time of the call, which is a habit that changes the temperature of most conversations. It didn't change hers. She recited it one more time, slower, as if I were old or dim. The signature is on file. I thanked her and hung up before I said something unprofessional. Then I sat very still while the kettle screamed at me, because condescension, I find, files itself away as fuel. Then I did what the bank apparently hoped no one ever would. The notary stamp was right there on my copy of the closing package. Name, commission number, expiration date. Pennsylvania keeps a public database of notary commissions, and I looked her up while my tea went cold. The notary whose stamp blessed my loan had left the Anchorstone Millbridge branch 2 months before the closing date printed beside her seal. She'd moved to South Carolina. Her commission had gone inactive, which meant her stamp had stayed behind in somebody's drawer, and somebody had gone on using it like a rubber ghost. I circled her commission number 3 times and added a second box to my legal pad, right under Terrence's. The bank stopped being a bank that morning. It became a crime scene with a drive-through. On day 4, the texts started arriving in bunches the way bills do. Roger first. What did you do to the cards? Then, this is embarrassing, Vivian. Fix it, then answer me. I pictured him at some bar, tapping his dead Visa against the counter like a man knocking on the door of a house he no longer owned. Delphine's messages came in the afternoon. The resort is threatening to involve the police. Is that what you want? And then the one I've saved to this day. Good luck. 21 years, and that's all he gets. I looked at that message a long time. My sister quoting my own goodbye back at me, from a beach my grandmother's money had paid for, and I felt the strangest calm settle over the kitchen. Yes, I thought. That's all he gets. That is precisely, exactly to the penny, all he gets. I didn't reply to any of them. I was busy. Spread across my dining table, in date order, were 13 duplicate withdrawal forms from Grandma Esther's brokerage account. 3 years of them. Each one wearing my name in handwriting that loops where mine breaks. I ran the total twice on the adding machine, because the first answer seemed impossible, and the tape said the same thing both times. $51,000, gone in slices, quiet as termites. 86 from the cabin. 51 from the brokerage, and a $38,000 wire frozen midair over the Gulf of Mexico. That would have made it 175. I sat back and looked at the tape hanging off the table, and for the first time all week, I said something out loud in my empty kitchen. You should have stayed at the 8th hole, Roger. If you've ever been the one who keeps the family books, the one everybody trusts to just handle it quietly, tell me in the comments. When did you learn that trust needs a paper trail? I learned it at my own kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with an adding machine and a stack of forged signatures. If this story sounds familiar, hit subscribe. It gets worse before it gets better. On Sunday, I drove the 15 minutes to my mother's house, the house I grew up in, and sat in her kitchen under the same rooster clock that has been wrong my whole life. I put my hands flat on the table and asked her straight. Mom, how long have you known? She stirred her coffee for a while, then her shoulders came down, and my mother, 67 years old, told me about Easter. 13 months ago, after the church egg hunt, she'd walked out to the back lot for her casserole dish and seen Delphine sitting in Roger's truck. Just sitting, she said, but not the way a sister-in-law sits. She'd stood behind a parked van holding her empty dish, and watched my husband tuck my sister's hair behind her ear. And then she had gone home and made dinner, and said nothing for 13 months to anyone. I kept praying it would burn itself out, she whispered. I was afraid if I said it out loud, it would become true. Her hands were shaking, and for one moment I saw it from inside her fear. A widow, 9 years alone. Doing the terrible math of a woman who believes she can only keep the daughters who aren't fighting. It's the only tenderness I can offer her in this story, so I'm offering it. Then the moment passed, and I stood up and rinsed my cup, because tenderness and accounting are different departments. You didn't keep the peace, Mom, I said from the doorway. You just kept the secret. She was crying when I left. I cried too in the driveway, for exactly as long as the garage door took to close. Then I drove home. I had an appointment at the county recorder's office in the morning. The Kestrel County Recorder's office smells like old paper and radiator heat, and I mean that as a compliment. I asked the clerk for every recorded document attached to 6 Sinclair Lake Road, and she came back with a short stack. My grandmother's deed, the transfer to me, the home equity lien I now knew about, and one more, a durable power of attorney, recorded 3 years ago, 2 pages, notarized, in which Vivian Castellan grants her husband Roger Castellan full authority over her financial affairs. Accounts, property, borrowing, the works. I read it standing at the counter while the clerk went on stamping somebody else's life behind me. There was my forged signature, looping right, above the stamp of a notary who had moved to South Carolina 2 months before the date beside her own seal. This was the skeleton piece. This was how one man walked into banks for 3 years wearing my name like a coat. Any teller who blinked at the paperwork could be shown this document. See? Right here. The wife signed it all over to him. Notarized and everything. The forgeries after this one weren't even risky. They were furniture. And in the bottom corner of the second page, faint but unmistakable, ran a line of small print I recognized, because I've filed 1,000 pages that carry it. An internal document code. The kind Anchorstone's branch systems print on paperwork generated in-house. This thing hadn't been downloaded off the internet at midnight. It had been drafted inside that branch, on their template, on their printer. I paid the clerk for 2 certified copies, and my hands were steady, which surprised even me. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my yes, and somebody inside that bank had helped him laminate it. I put the copies in my bag between 2 sheets of cardboard, like evidence, which is exactly what they were. Meredith Doyle has practiced law in this county for 28 years, wears reading glasses on a chain, and does not say wow lightly. She read the power of attorney in her office with her sandwich forgotten in its wrapper, and when she looked up, she took the glasses all the way off. Vivian, this is felony forgery. The dollar amount makes it grand theft, and the cabin is separate property. Inherited assets don't belong to the marriage, which means this isn't a messy divorce. This is a crime with a divorce attached. Then she built the machine the way good lawyers do, in numbered steps, while I took notes. 1. A forensic document examiner. A real one, court qualified. I would hand over 10 years of known signatures, tax filings, license renewals, client engagement letters, so the examiner could put science under what my eyes already knew. 2. A formal complaint to Detective Cho. The complete package, organized the way I organize everything, so the county prosecutor never has an excuse to call it complicated. 3. Silence. Do not tip him off, Meredith said. No angry texts. No lawyer letters to Mexico. Let him sit on that beach wondering why the money's frozen. Men like Roger make their worst mistakes while they're waiting. 4. The divorce filing. Prepared now, submitted alongside everything else. She also settled one small thing that had been itching at me. The locks. The Larkin Avenue house was half mine, and there was no court order in place. Changing the locks on the home I lived in was fully legal in Pennsylvania. You did it right, she said. You keep doing it right. I told her the truth. I don't want revenge, Meredith. I want the record corrected under oath. She smiled and picked her sandwich back up. Same thing, honey. Done properly. The next 10 days were paperwork, and I have never enjoyed paperwork more. The brokerage froze Grandma Esther's trust account on a victim of fraud affidavit. Every remaining dollar locked. The $38,000 wire was formally canceled, and the money settled back where it belonged, like a dog coming home. Anchorstone received a letter from me that I was allowed to read before it went out, and it used the phrase "facilitated by your personnel" in a way that made me pour a second cup of coffee just to enjoy it. The bank's response arrived in 4 business days. An internal investigation was now open. Meanwhile, somewhere in Quintana Roo, the ecosystem was collapsing. Roger's texts changed key like a man falling downstairs. "Vivian, be reasonable. Release the accounts and I'll sign anything." Then, the resort moved us to a smaller room. "Are you happy?" Then, and I had to read this one twice. "I need to come home and sort this out. We'll talk like adults." The man who wrote "We're not coming back" now needed to come back, and he was asking me to hold the door. He still thought this was a quarrel. He thought the freeze was me sulking with the tools I had. A wife's tantrum in spreadsheet form. And that once he got a tan, and I got lonely, the accounts would thaw. He had no idea there was a detective, an examiner, and a prosecutor's office between him, and every dollar he'd ever pretended was his. I never answered. On the 10th day, my phone rang, and it was Detective Cho, and her voice had news in it. "Mrs. Castellan, you might want to sit down. We found where the 51,000 went." I did not sit down. I stood at my kitchen window with the phone against my ear while Detective Cho walked me through it, bank by bank, form by form. The withdrawals from my grandmother's brokerage split into 2 eras, like layers in a road cut. The first era, starting 3 years back, went to Roger. Cash. Debts, the leftover rot from Castellan builders, the lifestyle repairs of a man pretending the failure hadn't happened. But the second era was different. Over the last 16 months, 7 of those 13 withdrawals, $30,000 worth, had landed in an account at a credit union 2 towns over. The account holder was Delphine Voss. The memo line said things like house repairs and consulting. My sister has never consulted on anything but a brunch menu. The tickets to Tulum, Cho added, were bought with a draw from the home equity line. My grandmother's cabin bought their boarding passes. I watched a cardinal land on the feeder outside my window and thought about Delphine at my office last spring, sweet as pie, asking about Roger's schedule. My sister hadn't just fallen into something with my husband. She had been on payroll for over a year. My grandmother's floor. Scrubbing money had been direct, deposited into the affair, and Delphine had cashed every installment while borrowing my earrings for church. Chu let the silence sit, then said the careful part. "With this structure, your sister is looking at receiving stolen property. Possibly worse. The prosecutor will want to know if you're prepared for that." On my refrigerator hung a photo from 3 Christmases ago. Mom, Delphine, me, matching aprons, flour everywhere. I looked at it while I answered. "Detective," I said, "I prepare taxes. I'm prepared for everything. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If it were your sister's name on that account, your own blood, would you still press charges? Put your answer in the comments." I read every one. And subscribe if you want to hear what I chose, because my mother begged me to pick the other door. And there was a moment, one long Sunday night, when I almost did. 2 weeks later, Anchorstone Bank invited us to a conference room with bottled water and a long table, which is what banks do instead of apologizing. Branch Vice President, Bank Counsel Meredith Me. I brought the binder. I'd built it the way I build an audit file, tabbed, indexed, chronological, and I walked them through it in the voice I use for tax season, the one with no adjectives in it. Tab 1, the power of attorney, with the state's notary database printout showing the commission inactive 2 months before the date on the stamp. Tab 2, the home equity application and closing package, 86,000 drawn. Tab 3, 13 withdrawal forms. Tab 4, the post office box rental record opened with Roger's own debit card. Because arrogance is its own filing error. Tab 5, Terence Cobb's letter on bank stationery, calling the only warning I ever received a system error. Bank counsel stopped taking notes on Tab 3. On Tab 5, he asked for a 5-minute recess and came back with a second lawyer. Then they brought in Terence. He'd lost weight since the last cookout, and he sat like a man whose chair was slowly heating up. He didn't look at me once. Everything went through standard process, he said to the table. Ask Roger. This was his family's business. His family's business. My cabin, my trust, my forged yes, his family's business. Nobody in that room believed him, including the man who signed his paychecks, and everyone could feel it. The vice president cleared his throat and suggested they pause, pending consultation with legal. Meredith capped her pen like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside in the parking lot, she finally said it. Wow. The examiner's report came back in 2 weeks, and it read like poetry to me. 38 pages of it. 29 signatures spanning 3 years, all classified as simulated, traced, or practiced imitations, written by someone else's hand. The report mapped it stroke by stroke. Pen lifts where I make none. A right looping V where mine has broken left since the 4th grade. Hesitation marks invisible to the eye and obvious to the microscope. Forgery isn't a talent, it turns out. It's a habit, and habits leave fingerprints. The bank's internal investigation landed the same week, and Anchorstone did what institutions do when the building is on fire. It saved itself. The notary log at the branch showed entries squeezed in after the fact, in ink that didn't match the surrounding pages. Terence Cobb was suspended, then terminated, then reported to state regulators by his own employer, in that order. Within 9 days, the bank voided the lion on my cabin and quietly absorbed the loss on the equity line, because their lawyer could read tab 5 as well as mine could. And then Terence, facing charges of his own, did the only reliable thing he'd done in 3 years. He called the prosecutor and offered everything. How Roger brought him a stack of pre-signed documents. How the power of attorney was drafted in the branch after hours, on the bank's own template. How the retired notary's stamp lived in a drawer. How that final $38,000 wire got logged as an in-person authorization by me, while Roger waited in the branch parking lot. How each step had seemed just one small favor bigger than the last. The first rule of fraud is the same as dominoes. It only takes one man trying to save himself. Meredith called me with the news and said the charges against Roger were being drawn up. He'll hear about it soon, she said. Where is he now? I checked my phone. Running out of money, I said. It took 3 weeks total for Paradise to foreclose. The resort evicted them when the bill went unpaid. Delphine's own card maxed out on the room deposit at a cheaper place. And on a Thursday evening in June, a rideshare I did not pay for stopped in front of my house, and Roger Castellan walked up his former driveway with a duffel bag and a sunburn. I watched from the front window as he tried his key, tried it again, then stared at the new brass deadbolt like it had personally betrayed him. Then came the knocking, then the pounding. I opened the door to the width of the chain. Up close, he looked older, and the charm came on like a porch light with a bad bulb. Honey, okay, this all got out of hand. Let me in, and we'll untangle it together. You're good at that. I said nothing, which has never once in 21 years failed to make Roger talk more. The charm burned off in under a minute. You froze my money, Vivian. You embarrassed me in front of. Do you have any idea what you've done? You'll regret making this public. Across the street, the Wilsons' porch light came on. And then the Aldens. Millbridge watches out for its accountants. I looked at my husband through the gap the chain allowed, and I gave him the only sentence I had prepared. You said you weren't coming back. It's the only promise you kept for 3 weeks. Then I closed the door, and the deadbolt made its good news sound. Through the window, I saw the patrol car turn onto Larkin Avenue right on schedule, because Detective Cho had told me warrants don't care about sunburns. Roger was arrested on the driveway he used to mow. Delphine found me 4 days later in the parking lot of Cardigan Market, between my car and the cart return, because ambushes run in the family now. Her tan was peeling, and her voice was already halfway to breaking. You have to call this off. Roger's mother won't even look at me. Do you understand? They arrested him in the street like a criminal. I put my groceries in the trunk 1 bag at a time and let her talk, because I'd waited 35 years to hear my sister say what she actually believed, and she did not disappoint. Grandma's money should have been half mine, Vivian. Half. You did her books for 9 years so she'd cut me out. Don't pretend that was love, that was strategy. Roger just took back what this family owed me. There it was. the whole ledger of her, laid out between the shopping carts. She hadn't stolen anything in her mind. She'd been collecting a debt, and my husband had simply been the teller who processed it. A woman with a toddler hurried past us and pretended not to listen. Delphine stepped closer, and her voice dropped into the old groove, the one from Grandma's anniversary dinner. You were always the calculator, Vivian. Never the heart. I closed the trunk. I looked at my little sister, the peeling tan, the trembling chin, the credit union account with $30,000 of a dead woman's cleaning money moving in and out of it, and I finally answered that line, 6 years late. The calculator is why you're not in jail yet. Her face went uncertain. Because she didn't know about the charges being weighed against her, and I wasn't the one who was going to tell her. I got in my car. In the mirror, my sister looked very small, and for the first time in our lives, correctly sized. My mother came to my house on a Sunday night in her church clothes, carrying a lemon pound cake like a peace treaty. I made her coffee because she is my mother, and this is Pennsylvania. Then she set her cup down and made her request. Drop the part about Delphine. Whatever they're deciding, tell them you don't want it. Roger, fine. Let him answer for it, but she's your sister, Vivian. Your blood. The whole church is talking. Your father, God rest him, would want this family whole. I let the clock tick a while, and I'll be honest with you, the way I promised to be at the start. There was a long moment at that table when I almost said yes. Not for Delphine, for my mother's hands around that coffee cup, and for the version of this family that existed back when the aprons matched. Then I remembered whose money bought the plane tickets, and whose name was borrowed to do it, and I found my footing. Mom, it isn't mine to drop. The prosecutor decides now, not me. And I won't ask him to go easy because here's what I've learned this year. She looked up. You protected the family name for 13 months, I said gently, because gentle and firm can share a sentence. I'm going to protect the family truth. Those are different jobs, and somebody in this family finally has to do the second one. She cried a little and I let her. And I still wrapped up half the pound cake for her to take home, because boundaries are walls with doors in them, not moats. At the door, she asked what happens next. A trial, Mom, I said. And you should come. The truth does better with family in the room. Roger made bail. His mother in Scranton put up her certificate of deposit, which is its own kind of heartbreak, and the county offered him a plea within the month. Admit the forgery, accept restitution of $137,000, serve 18 months. Any man with a working calculator takes that deal. Roger turned it down. Meredith heard the reasoning through the courthouse grapevine, which in this county is faster than email, and she relayed it to me over lunch with one eyebrow already raised. He told his lawyer, you'd never go through with it. Quote, if Vivian hates scenes, she'll settle quietly before she ever takes the stand. I stirred my soup and considered the strange comfort of being underestimated by the same man in the same way for 21 years. He'd built his whole defense on the wife he'd invented. The bookkeeper in the background, who would rather eat glass than raise her voice in public. His attorney, a shiny man from Harrisburg, had a theory to match. I was the controlling one, the woman who ran every dollar in that house, so obviously I'd known about the loans, approved them even, and only cried forgery when the marriage collapsed. They chose a bench trial, betting a judge would find money quarrels boring, and they were going to paint my carefulness as control and my silence as consent. Meredith asked if I understood what cross-examination would try to do to me. I told her I've been through IRS audits with clients who kept receipts in a tackle box. He's betting everything on one thing, Meredith said, that you won't stand up in front of the whole county and say it out loud. Will you? I finished my soup. Book the whole front row, I said. The evening before trial, I drove the 40 minutes up to Sinclair Lake alone. The Leon was off the cabin by then. The bank had seen to that with impressive speed, once its own paperwork turned radioactive. But Leons come off titles faster than they come off people. I walked the little dock my grandfather built, and let the boards complain under me the way they always have. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and 1962. Grandma Esther's reading chair still faces the water. Her measuring cups still hang in size order, because she was that kind of woman. And apparently so am I. I sat in her chair with my testimony binder on my knees and went through it one last time. Tabs in color order, the timeline down to the minute. 29 forged signatures, each matched against a true one, side by side, like before, and after photographs of my own name. Somewhere on the water, a loon called, and I thought about her hands, the ones that scrubbed office floors at 5 in the morning, so nobody could ever take this view away from her family. Check the math twice, she used to say, licking her thumb to turn my homework pages. Then sign your name like you mean it. They had taken her savings, her cabin's clean title, and the sound of my own name on a signature line, and they had spent it on swim, up bars. The math had been checked twice and 3 times, by me, by an examiner, by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. All that remained was the signing. I opened the binder's front cover and wrote my name across the inside page. The real signature. The V breaking left. Tomorrow, the whole county was going to learn the difference. The Kestrel County Courthouse is 110 years old, and Courtroom B has a ceiling fan that turns like it's paid by the hour. By 9 that morning, the benches were full. Adele Frost sat in the second row with 3 of my longtime clients flanking her like a church committee. My mother sat in the third row in her navy funeral dress, holding her purse with both hands. A reporter from the Millbridge Courier had claimed the aisle seat, pencil already moving. Millbridge does not get many trials where the evidence has a lake view. Roger sat at the defense table, in a suit I'd bought him for a cousin's wedding, and he'd gotten a haircut, and when I walked in, he tried the old smile on me, the cookout smile, and I watched it die of natural causes halfway across the room. The prosecutor, a methodical young man named Holloway, whom I'd come to respect, opened by placing a single enlarged document on the wooden exhibit stand, which creaked. The power of attorney. He let it sit there in silence for a moment, in front of the judge, the way you display a rattlesnake in a jar. Then came Terence Cobb, who had taken his plea and now belonged to the state. Terence testified in a voice like wet cardboard. The after-hours drafting session on the bank's own template, the stamp of a notary 2 months gone to South Carolina in a drawer, the log entries added later, in ink that didn't match. Small favors, he kept saying. It started with small favors, while the fan turned overhead and Roger stared at the table. On cross, Roger's shiny Harrisburg attorney went where we knew he'd go. Isn't it true that Mrs. Castellan controlled every dollar in that household, that nothing moved without her approval? He said my name like an accusation, and I sat straight in the front row and let it land on me and slide off. Holloway stood back up. Your Honor, the state calls Vivian Castellan. I have prepared clients for audits for 14 years, and my advice never changes. Answer the question asked, bring your paper, and let the numbers do the emotions. On the stand, I finally took my own advice in public. Holloway walked me through the binder 1 tab at a time, and I kept every answer short and level, the tax season voice, and the courtroom got quieter with each exhibit. Exhibit 12, a withdrawal form. March 2 years ago, $3,800. The signature loops right. Mine breaks left, it has since I was 10. Page after page, the same sentence built like bricks. The wire order, signed at a teller window at 3:20 on an afternoon when I was in my office with a client whose confirmation email, intake sheet, and the jeweler's parking lot camera all agreed on where I was standing. The home equity closing, attended in person by me, on a day I was at a CPA conference in Pittsburgh. My badge scans, my hotel folio, and a continuing education certificate, all in the binder under tab 9, because the one useful thing about my life is that it comes with receipts. Then, the shiny attorney stood up for cross, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at me the way men smile when they're about to explain my own household to me. Mrs. Castellan, you ran every dollar of that home. You reconcile accounts for a living, and you expect this court to believe $86,000 moved past you and you missed it. The ceiling fan turned twice while I looked at him. I didn't miss the numbers, counselor. The numbers were hidden from me. There's a difference, and it's a felony. Somebody in the back row made a sound they turned into a cough. The judge wrote something down. The attorney checked his legal pad, tried the statement's angle, and I explained the post office box, rented with my husband's own debit card, into which 3 years of my financial life had been quietly detoured 5 blocks from my office. He tried the courtesy notice angle, and I read Terence Cobb's system error letter aloud, on bank stationery, dated and signed. Then he asked for a moment to confer. And Roger. I watched it happen. shook off his lawyer's hand and stood up. Against the advice of counsel, a phrase that will now follow him forever, Roger took the stand after lunch. He wanted the county to hear his side, and the county heard it. He started calm, hands folded, telling the judge about a man who'd built houses with his back, while his wife built walls with her spreadsheets. 2 minutes in, the folded hands came apart. 5 minutes in, the voice began to climb, and I recognized the sound from 21 years of kitchen table skirmishes. The sound of Roger realizing the room isn't agreeing with him. 21 years on an allowance, he said, and the word allowance came out splintered. Her money, her rules, her grandmother's precious cabin sitting on that lake. The judge tapped the gavel once. Roger leaned into the microphone. I built that life. She kept the keys. You want to talk about what's criminal? The gavel came down harder, and his own attorney had a hand over his eyes now, and still Roger climbed, because the man never once in his life stopped at the yellow light, so. Yes. Yes. I signed her name. Somebody in that marriage had to act like a man. The room went absolutely silent, except for the fan. His lawyer sat down slowly. The way you sit when the verdict has just testified. And then Roger turned in the witness chair, found my face in the front row, and pointed at me across courtroom B. Say something, he shouted at me, in front of the judge, the courier, my mother, and God. For once in your life, feel something. I looked back at him and gave him exactly what I'd given him from my kitchen table at 9:52 on a Wednesday night. Silence and a level face. I did not move. The fan turned. The court reporter's keys ticked like an adding machine, entering it all into the permanent record. And I remember thinking that after 21 years, Roger Castellan had finally told the whole truth in public, under oath, at volume. The quietest person in the room had gotten the loudest man in the county to confess. All I had to do was nothing. The judge did not need long. Guilty on the forgery counts, felony. Guilty on grand theft. Restitution set at $137,000. 86 from the cabin line, 51 from my grandmother's brokerage, the frozen wire having already found its way home. 28 months, with a portion suspended, contingent on restitution, and full cooperation with the bank's regulators. The courtroom took it quietly. My mother made one small sound behind me, a mother's sound, and I don't fault her for it. There was cleanup after, the kind that doesn't make headlines but balances the ledger. Terence Cobb, by his plea, probation, a fraud conviction of his own, banned from banking by the regulators. The man who notarized ghosts will spend his working years asking if you want the extended warranty. Anchorstone settled with me quietly and adequately, and my cabin's title today is as clean as its windows. Delphine pleaded to receiving stolen property, a misdemeanor, by the grace of cooperation with her own restitution schedule and 180 hours of community service. She avoided jail, and I'm told this was partly because the paper trail I built made it easy to be precise about exactly what she took, and precision is mercy's best friend. The divorce, with a fraud finding attached, went the way fraud findings go. The man walked out of my life with his truck, his clothes, and a payment book. But the detail I keep, the one I'd put in a frame if you could frame such things, came at the end of the hearing when they brought Roger the paperwork to acknowledge the judgment. He took the pen, and his hand shook so badly that he had to study it with the other one, and I watched my husband struggle for the first time in 3 years to produce a signature. His own. The first honest name that man had signed since the 8th hole, and it barely held its shape. Mine in the front row was steady in my lap. The bailiff gathered his things. They walked him up the aisle toward the doors toward me. The center aisle of courtroom B runs past the front row, and the bailiff's route gave Roger one last moment at my shoulder. He stopped. The bailiff allowed it. One beat of grace. Up close, the sunburn had faded, and the cookout charm was gone, and what was left was just a man in a borrowed-looking suit with cuffed hands, looking at the woman who'd kept his books, his house, and his secrets running for 21 years, without ever once being thanked for the bookkeeping. Vivian, he said, quiet now, the microphone voice all used up. Please tell them who I was for 21 years, and I looked up at him the way I look at a reconciled account. No anger left in it. No love, either. Every line explained. Nothing outstanding. And I gave him back the only reply this whole story ever required, the one I'd typed at my kitchen table, with the payroll ledger, still open beside my phone. Good luck. His face did something complicated, and the bailiff moved him along, and the doors at the back of courtroom B swung shut behind my husband with a sound like a drawer closing. Down the hall, Delphine stood against the wall by the water fountain, and did not come near me. My mother wept into her handkerchief in the row behind. And Adele Frost, 13 years my client and better than family that day, squeezed my elbow with her little jeweled hand and said, "Your grandmother would have signed her name to this day, honey. She would have twice." The divorce was final 6 weeks later, and the restitution comes out of Roger's wages every month, like weather. I don't watch for it anymore. But Meredith's office tells me it has never once been late, because the alternative is explained on the judgment in plain English. Delphine moved to Arizona before the leaves turned. She sent me one letter, 4 pages, and I read every word at the cabin with coffee, because whatever else is true, she is my sister and I wanted to know. There was an apology in it, and around the apology, doing most of the talking, were the old arithmetic errors. Half of Grandma's money should have been hers. Everyone had always underestimated what she'd been through. I didn't write back. Her restitution payments arrive on schedule. And I've decided that's her real letter. It's the first thing she's ever paid back in her life, and I intend to let her finish. My mother and I have found our new arrangement. She calls on Sundays. She comes for coffee once a month, and we talk about her knees and her tomatoes, and sometimes, carefully, about everything else. The first time she started a sentence with, "If you just kept it private," I said, "Mom," in the tax season voice, and she stopped. And she hasn't started that sentence since. Keeping the peace is no longer this family's policy. We keep the truth now. And it turns out the truth also comes with pound cake, just less often. The cabin is mine. Clean on every line of the title, and I drive up most Sundays and do my week's paperwork in Grandma Esther's chair with the window open to the water. Her measuring cups still hang in size order, so do mine now, at home, and I don't care to be teased about it. My little office on Chestnut Street has never been busier, though the appointments have changed shape. Women come in, farm wives, retired teachers, widows. One librarian who drove in from 2 counties over, and they set papers on my desk the way you set down something heavy, and they say some version of the same sentence. "Vivienne, can you look at what my husband asked me to sign?" I always look. That part is always free. Some of the papers are fine, most of them, honestly. And I get to watch a woman's shoulders come down from around her ears, which has become my favorite part of this profession. And a few of the papers are not fine. And those women get the other speech, the one that starts with "You're not crazy," and "You're not stupid," and ends with Meredith Doyle's phone number in their coat pocket, the new rule in my house, and I'd carve it over the door if the Historical Society would let me, is simple. Nobody signs for anybody in this family. Not for convenience, not for kindness, not for love. Love, it turns out, was never the problem. Love doesn't need your signature. It needs your eyes open, your statements unredirected, and your name in your own handwriting, with the V breaking left, on every single thing you agree to, and on nothing ever that you don't. I spent 21 years believing love meant handling everything quietly. But the day I learned the difference between keeping the peace and keeping the truth, I stopped lending my name to other people's lies. And my signature, the real one, turned out to be the only inheritance my grandmother actually left me. That's my story. 1 text from Tulum, 1 short reply, and 29 forged signatures that finally put the right name on everything. If this story reminded you to pull your own statements, or to ask what your signature is attached to, take that as a sign. Do it this week. If you know a woman who needs this reminder, share this video with her. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.